Hey folks, in this episode of the podcast, I get to sit down with New York City-based director and portrait photographer, Mr. Scott McDermott. This is TWiP. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today's episode is all about portrait photography and all the little bits and baubles that go into being a successful portrait photographer. And I'm lucky enough to have Mr. Scott McDermott on the show to kind of dive into the world of portrait photography. And I want to take this interview in a, not just a what camera do you use, what lights are the best, yada, 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 all that stuff. But I want to get into the psychology of portrait photography a little bit. Where is it today versus where was it back in the day? Have things changed? How has COVID affected portrait photographers? All that. So this is your State of the Union for portrait photography. Scott, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, man. We have so much to talk about. I love portrait photography. I feel like it is the, I don't want to say the original photography, but it's like, back in the day, you see those old photographers with the flash powder and, people have to stand still for 30 minutes just to get the exposure and all that. But the work was always brilliant. It always captured sort of the zeitgeist of people from that time. And you fast forward to 2022, when we're recording this, you're still carrying that torch forward, from when people were shooting in the 1800s, right? You're still doing portrait photography, albeit with better tools and better distribution methods, but boom, it's still as important as it was back in the day. Let's start with a little background on Scott, right? How did you, what's your pedigree in photography and why did you choose this particular genre, portrait photography and directing, et cetera, versus landscape or street or those other things?
Well, yeah, just to go back to your setup there, I think, there's a saying about the first car race, and it was when they built the second car. And I think, that portrait photography was probably like the first thing someone did when they really got a camera was pointed at someone else. And so it's kind of an ancient thing and maybe an ancient art form. It goes to painting and all the, cave drawings and all that stuff. So yeah, it goes way back. But for me, I started my photography journey kind of in sport, really. And it came out of being someone who was really into the outdoors and really into participating in skiing and that kind of stuff when I was in high school and then in college, and then making that realization that you could maybe do that for a living. And that's how I sort of started in photography, was going down that road. But then I ended up in New York City and realized that you kind of can't make it as an adventure photographer in New York City. It's just not where you should be. So it sort of pivoted from there to sports in the studio and bodybuilding, and I shot a lot of stuff for Men's Health and that kind of muscle body portrait type stuff, and then that turned into athlete portraits, and then portraits of everybody, famous people, non-famous people, and for all different applications, not sports at all. So it sort of morphed that way, and it was like an organically growing thing. But I didn't really set out to shoot portraits specifically in the very beginning. It was more about action and covering or capturing what I wanted to be doing in the sports world. And so that's kind of the arc of it.
And how do you define portraiture, right? What is a portrait? Is it just a picture of a person? And what makes something a portrait versus just a photo of a person sitting there, or a street photography shot of a person sipping coffee in a corner cafe in New York versus a portrait of a person sipping coffee at a corner cafe? Is it just depth of field? Is it intention? Is it lighting? What makes something a portrait versus not?
I think it's the awareness of the subject that you're taking their picture. So it's the fact that they know you're taking the picture and they're sort of sitting for it, and it's a two-way experience as opposed to a voyeuristic journalism, captured moment, which could look like a portrait and framing and all that stuff. But I think with the portrait, there's a sense of the subject is sitting for it, and it's an intentional act on their part. I think that's right from my art history classes.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, this whole thing is subjective, right? Everything about the art form of photography is subjective. Like, what's a landscape? Sure, it's got stuff in it, but what makes this a landscape versus that a landscape shot, or what makes this street photography versus that? You know, one of the things that I always want to ask photographers, because I would say that portrait photography for me is probably my favorite genre of photography. And I'm curious as to why it's your favorite, albeit, notwithstanding the stuff that you said earlier. But the reason that I love portrait photography, I think, is because, especially if you're shooting pictures of, models or whatever, regardless of who you're shooting, you're capturing that point in time of that person, and they're never going to look like that again. Like, even the next day they're going to be different, but you're capturing them at that specific space-time continuum and giving them a record of themselves at that point in time. What is it about portrait photography, like from that sort of subdermal level, excites you about the genre?
Well, there's kind of two parts to it. There's the documentation part, like you said, and that's very true. It is very much a timestamp of that person at that time. But then there's sort of the performance element that the person could bring to it. They could do something wacky in the picture. They could, pose in a certain way, and that gives it a completely different meaning. There's their facial expression, all that stuff. And then within a shoot, there's a huge gamut of, what they've done, what they've chosen to reveal. Maybe they did nothing and that was fine, and all that. And then it comes down to editing to a certain extent, like which side of them do you want to reveal and how do you want to steer it from there? So it's kind of two parts. There's three parts, I would say. There's what that person wants to reveal, the subject, what the photographer captures in that moment you're together, and then the edit, which is of everything that came out of that shoot, which one do you choose to show? Mm-hmm. And between those three variables, it can go wildly differently in any direction. It's pretty interesting. And there's another crazy phenomenon with celebrities where, I could set up a portrait that's technically identical with like my assistant before, in the studio before someone shows up. And whatever, it's a perfectly fine picture. But then let's say, just because he's there, Clint Eastwood comes and sits down under the exact same lighting conditions and does almost nothing, just stares at the camera. And all of a sudden it's this interesting picture of Clint Eastwood that has a lot more meaning than the picture of my, assistant, for whatever reason, because the, viewer might have baggage about having seen Clint Eastwood as a kid in a movie or whatever. The viewer brings their own side to the coin. So it's really an interesting phenomenon that happens with, not just the lighting and what you do as a photographer, but then what the viewer takes on with it afterwards.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that picture back there, and I saw that on your. We're going to talk about Domestika a little bit in the end of this. I saw it on the Domestika page for the course that you have on portrait lighting and photography as well. But I'm curious, what was that like, shooting an iconic, face like that? Was he like the stereotypical Hollywood guy that comes in with an entourage and you get like 0.03 seconds to get the shot, or was he more personable? How did that flow go from him coming in to, him going out and you feeling like you as the photographer got the shot?
Well, this specific shot was part of a big series of portraits I did for Nelson Mandela's foundation, and it was a double image with his hand going like this, and then the face. And so it was shot in a couple of different places where we had like a big event for the foundation, and there were all these A-list celebrities there. It was a big cocktail party at the Beverly Hills Hotel in LA. And so they were all there to do like a foundation event, and then I was set up like in the next room, and they would all come and have their picture taken. And even though they were there for the event and to have their picture taken, it's still not their favorite activity, and you have to sort of control them to come into the other room, and they don't want to do it. And yes, some of them give you less than 30 seconds, and it's very like transactional, and they don't really give you much necessarily. So in this case, Clint came in, and this is the very first frame. Like, he just stands in front of the camera and he's not into it, and he's just kind of like, "Argh," and he gives you that Clint Eastwood, I don't want to be here thing. And then later he smiles and he does all this fun stuff. But that's not the Clint we want to see, you know? So there's an example of editing, whereas this is my favorite shot because it has that sort of, grimacing 1,000-mile stare that we all know Clint for. And so, you know, a big smiley, happy Clint is not really the image, you know? So, but I certainly have both. And so that, you know, I chose this one because I think it's my favorite. And so, yeah, it was very quick. I mean, I think the whole thing is less than 2 minutes. You know, he goes to 2 different sets, and, you know, that's kind of it. And in this case, it was because it's at basically a party. It was very quick with everybody. But sometimes you get to hang out for a day, and sometimes you get, 30 seconds. So It all depends on the circumstance.
But the lighting on that shot is so tell me that, so let's talk about lighting, and we'll transition into gear a little bit. Was that your standard sort of 3-point, main light, fill light, backlight, or 4-point hair light type setup? Right. Or did you go in and we're just going to put a softbox with a black background or gray and go for it? What was the setup like for that?
Well, so the way this whole project came about was this agency reached out to me and said, we want to shoot a whole series of celebrities' hands in black and white, just their palm of their hand, kind of like this. And they wanted this really gritty black and white so that you could see all the little cracks and stuff in their hands. And so that's what we did. And we certainly have everyone's hand like that. And so, but the technique, the lighting technique came from trying to make as much grit and sort of crunchy, almost shades of gray, like a pencil drawing, out of that technique. And so they didn't even want to shoot faces. And I said, well, come on, we're going to have these amazing people here. I got to shoot their faces as well. I can't just have Clint Eastwood come and shoot his hand and he leaves. Mm-hmm. So those hand pictures are a white background with a black edge around them. And so I decided for the faces, I'll flip that lighting scheme to a black background with a white edge. And so it also had to be just as gritty as the hands, which is a challenging way to shoot people's faces because it's definitely not flattering. I mean, it's pulling out every little, nook and cranny of whatever you've got going on in your face, which is, sort of almost the opposite of what a lot of people try to do lighting wise. But for this one specific thing, it was sort of like an all in, let's go for it type of approach. And so part of my lighting philosophy and what we kind of go into in the Domestica course is a way of thinking about lighting in sort of the fundamentals of not like, oh, well, I'm going to use a softbox because I always use a softbox on people's faces. It's like, what kind of light gives you the characteristics that I want for this kind of shot? And that would be a very specular light, and that would be something that falls off very quickly. So it needs to be physically close to the subject. So if you put the light across the room, it would be the same exposure here as it would be here. But if you put the light right here, like literally less than a foot away, like right out of frame, then this is very hot and this is like 3 stops darker just because it falls off quicker because it's closer. So using kind of those main principles of like, okay, we want really hard light, we want it close. That's how I kind of built that lighting technique. And other times, like, let's put a giant softbox that fills the entire back of the room, and that's a whole nother thing we're after, Yeah. So it was a way of kind of thinking about it critically and building it from there.
I love that. Yeah, that's interesting because you hear a lot of photographers say that, you've heard this, right? I'm a natural light photographer. I don't use strobe, poo-poo artificial light. It's all about window light. That's the most romantic or whatever, and then you'll hear other photographers say, I'm a one light photographer. I got one light. That's all I use. I'm going to teach you how to use one light. You could change the world with one light. And then on the far other end of the spectrum, there are people that are like, by any means necessary. I'm going to visualize the shots and I'm going to build the light that I want around that. Are you? It sounds like you might be all of those people rolled into one, right? So it's kind of the James Bond photographer, the opportunistic, like, okay, I want to do this shot. I need this light. I need this light. I need a hair light. Or it's a model and I'm just doing headshots. I just want one big giant softbox sitting in front of him or her. Like, where do you fall in that?
Yeah, I'm definitely like the right tool for the right job type thing. And there's lots of different jobs that I do. I'm not someone that shoots like the same thing all the time. So, I get it if there's someone who's like a headshot photographer and they basically shoot that all the time and maybe even the same room, then they have a formula, they plug that in and fair enough, and if it works and everyone's happy, then great. But my situation is, I shoot a ton of different stuff on location, in studios, in makeshift studios, in terrible rooms with 7-foot ceilings, or in massive hangar type spaces. It's literally everything across the gamut, and always different, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that, and the variety of it is great. And so, but what that means is that I need to know what the toolbox is out there and what the right tool for the right job is, and basically the way to do that is to start with the fundamentals. Like, what do we want this picture to look like? What kind of light, and in what situation, and what tools do we need to make that happen? And so, it's just a question of knowing what's out there and knowing what it all does and knowing when to use it and why. Yeah.
That's the definition of a professional. Just what you said, right? It's being able to produce repeatable results with a varying situation around you, right? So you can create great work at that coffee shop I was alluding to earlier, or in the studio, or wherever. You can do it and kind of assemble the right tools to do that. So with continuing sort of that tool vein of the conversation, what's your go-to tool set for portraiture? Which camera are you shooting with, which lenses, and lighting? If you're going to use artificial lighting, what are you using? Is it Profoto or Godox, or like what do you gravitate towards?
Yeah, so basically strobe is kind of the ultimate tool for stills, and in the strobe world, I use a lot of Profoto because it's basically available everywhere for rental, and I'm a big renter. I don't own almost anything lighting wise, again, because it's all about the right tool for the job. And if you buy something, you're kind of forced to use it, even if it's not the right tool for the job. Plus it's expensive. So I just haven't invested in a ton of gear. And everywhere I shoot, pretty much there's local stuff available. I have basically rental accounts in Toronto, Vancouver, Salt Lake City, LA, like all over the place. So, and then if you got to go somewhere weird where there isn't any lighting, like let's say West Virginia, you just bring it from New York, So, so I'm not like someone that is very much like gear, let's say I'm not super loyal to any one brand. It's all about what is the right thing. And sometimes it's Broncolor, which is great, and that they have some really cool, like very specific stuff about their packs. Like you can dial in the flash duration and stuff like that. And so when you need that, they're ideal. So I basically have a 3-camera little arsenal, which is the Fuji GX 100 for medium format. That's 102 megapixel. That thing is amazing. It's basically, the ultimate in camera technology, I think, in the history of the medium. It's like you have this incredible sensor, large sensor with shallow depth of field, everything that's great about medium format, but finally autofocus that works, just about as well as the Sonys. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah. My sort of workhorse is the Nikon D850, which I've had for like basically since it came out, and that thing's been amazing. And then I have a Sony A7 III, a couple of those, and that stuff for every now and then I shoot on film sets, and you have to be completely silent, and those are kind of the best for that world. So that's kind of my, and again, it's the right tool for the job. So if it's studio portraits, it's the Fuji. If it's, something like a sports type setup or on the fly moving location type work, then the Nikons are great. And if it's film set work or something where it has to be really quiet and minimal, then the Sonys are the way to go.
I love that. Yeah, see, that's refreshing to hear, because you know, in the photography industry, photographers tend to be, and I'm generalizing, of course, but they tend to be brand loyal. Like, I'm a Nikon shooter, I'm a Sony shooter, I'm a Fuji shooter, and here's why my brand is amazing and yours sucks, right? Or even lighting. I shoot all pro photo, and Godox is for commoners, right? I'm just gonna, you know, it's refreshing to hear that you say, you know, like A-Team, when you suit up for a job, you grab the right things, you know, to go do that job and do the mission. Who cares who made it? It's what it can do, right?
Yeah. No, 100%. And, you know, the thing about Pro Photo is it's the go-to brand in all, you know, sort of across the world. I mean, I've shot in China and Japan and Brazil, and they all have Pro Photo, you know, and it's great because you know how it works, and it's exactly like the Pro Photo here. And so, and I never had a beef with Pro Photo. It's been always amazing. But yeah, so that's sort of the one that, you know, kind of rises to the top just because it's always there, and everyone knows it, and all the assistants know it, and you know, it's great.
You know, as a New York City-based portrait photographer and director, but specifically on the portrait photography stuff, has the mode changed from, you know, my holy grail or my goal in life is to have a studio on the upper whatever side, wherever all the cool stuff is, right? I'm in California, so I don't know. But to have a cool studio somewhere with all the lighting and the assistants and the computer set up, ready to go, and my office in there, and people come over and that's my stuff. Or is the mode now, like what you were talking about, is I just move around and I rent as I need. I rent space when I need it and do the shoot and then bounce. Like what's the goal for a portrait photographer that's aspiring to be, you know, as successful as you are?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's changed completely. Like when I first showed up in New York in the mid 90s, it was still that kind of, you know, a photographer has a studio with a staff and all their own equipment. They own all their stuff. And, you know, it is very much like a photography business has a place where they do the photography. And even if you didn't necessarily shoot in the studio, you still had one for whatever. And you know, people did that all the time. I mean, maybe rents were lower a bit back then, but you know, honestly, that's a crazy amount of expense to carry every month. I mean, you've got full-time staff and you just a ton of overhead. And I think somewhere around the late 90s, early 2000s, the rental studio thing, it really exploded, and there's spaces everywhere, and that's continued. And I think nowadays you just don't need to do that, and it's that expense as just from a pure business standpoint isn't necessary. I mean, I have this office that I'm in right here, and I have a closet full of gear that's basically bags of cameras and a few light stands and that kind of thing, you know, odd stuff. But other than that, it's all rental studios, rental lighting, rental staff. You know, nothing is sort of proprietary to me necessarily, except for myself. So, but the great thing about that is flexibility. So I can rent the exact studio I need for the job. Like I have something coming up where we're going to do projection on the walls, and I need it on 3 different walls. And so I know a studio that has a basically like half an eggshell cyc, where it's like the inside of an egg. It's on all 3 sides in the ceiling. So you know, in that case, that's the perfect spot. And other times you need a massive amount of window light. So we'll find like, you know, something that, but if I own my studio, I'm stuck with whatever I have. So, you know, or I could go rent it and not use my studio that I'm paying for, you know? So I don't know. I think it's kind of the new school that's kind of popped up sort of, you know, in the last 10 or 15 years, where everything's flexible, everything's a tool, everything is somewhat disposable, and gives you the freedom to use the right one. And in a place like New York, there's a massive amount of variety in studios, gear, crew. You know, it's everything you need is here for sure. It might not be obviously the case in smaller markets and anywhere else, but you know, that's why we're here.
How are you handling the rental piece of it, though? Is it you go to, and I want to know how you rent these studios too. Is there like a site where you go to pick, and look at, okay, yeah, that's the layout. Oh, they have a psych, or they have this, they have window light or whatever. Book it for this window of time, swipe your credit card, and you get the access to get to that studio. And do they have all the stuff that you need there at these studios that you rent? Or do you have to make a quick stop at B&H on your way to that location to grab a bunch of stuff and then go set up? How does that work? Take us into kind of a day in the life of a shoot that you booked for, rental space and rental gear in order to create a mid to high end level shoot.
Sure. So first of all, it all gets, billed to the client. So, I'm working mostly advertising jobs, some editorial stuff, but it all comes out of the budget. So I'm not personally paying for it. So the one downside to this business model is that when you want to shoot for yourself, you have nowhere to shoot. So you have to either figure that out or pay for it yourself. So that's the one downside to it. But let's say, so a shoot's coming up. It all really hinges off the creative. Like, what kind of a picture? What do we need for this specific thing? How much space? How many crew is there going to be? Is there going to be massive wardrobe? Do we need a huge area for that? Do we need a psych? Do we not need a psych? Natural light? No natural light? All those questions. So then you basically have a short list of locations that might work. I know a bunch of studios just from experience in the city that are the go-to place for psychs or the go-to place for natural light or both, or so I kind of already have a short list in my head. But every now and then I'll go on a site called Splacer, which is a great, it's almost like Airbnb for studios, and they're all over the country. Nice. So like Long Beach in LA, and I needed a studio there, and it was great. I mean, it's literally just like Airbnb. You can look up the place, see pictures of it. It tells you what they have, what they don't have. You can book it by the hour or full day, gives you the rates, and you literally, like you said, just swipe your credit card and book it like a hotel. And so that's been a huge, great resource for places outside of town, and even sometimes in New York when you need something a little offbeat, or you're looking for like a rustic brick wall or who knows what, you can kind of go through the web and find that. And that's pretty new. I'd say within the last 3 or 4 years that sites like that have popped up, and they're an amazing resource. It's cool. Before, you used to have to kind of call around and know the places, maybe talk to a producer friend or something, but yeah, that's Splacer site. I think there's another one, but I can't remember the name. That's like Airbnb for studios concept is out there, and it's quite effective.
If you think of that other one, send it over to me, and I'll include it in the blog post. But the first one was Splicer, so definitely gonna check that out. And do they have the lighting and all that stuff there? Or is it just an empty room and you BYO lighting, BYO camera?
Some of them do have lighting in house. Most of them it's grip in house, and lighting you can get from somewhere else. But yeah, it depends. They're all very different. A lot of them are people's apartments, with just have like an amazing roof deck, or it's the whole gamut of like fully stocked lighting, professional studios, psychs, to literally someone with an empty room that has a cool something going on that they want to rent out. So you really have to kind of go through, but it's great. It has all the search functions you could want with outdoor space, psych, whatever, check boxes and stuff, so you can find pretty quickly what you're looking for.
That sounds like a dream, and I'm checking that out after this, because I wonder, I'm in like I mentioned before we started recording, I'm in Northern California, relatively close to Oakland and San Francisco, so I'm wondering, those places have got to have this covered, right?
Be surprised what's out there too, because you think, geez, I don't know of any professional studio, and you go on there and you're like, whoa, there's like 15 of them within 10 blocks of here or something. I used it really to great effect in I was in Phoenix and had to do a pretty big like video and stills project, and found like several great options through that site. So yeah,
it's a good fantastic one. Good tip. Before we move on to education type stuff, I want to chat a little bit about, portrait photography is a close human contact type sport, right? I mean, you're not touching other people, but you're getting relatively close to them. And as we I don't know where we are in COVID. We're in August, the end of August in 2022. So who knows if we're, at the end of it yet. Right. But But I'm curious how it has impacted you as a New York City, which at one point was an epicenter of COVID outbreaks there. Like how has the whole new world order of COVID affected the high-end portrait photographer?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy bumpy road. You know, that 2020 lockdown was pretty insane, and just the rest of 2020 got, you know, just no work. I mean, it all just dried up and slowly started to come back. And I actually started doing more video stuff first, which for whatever reason, you know, just that was the first stuff to come back. But yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, you can't get around getting in, you know, the same room as somebody. I mean, there was like a weird bunch of remote shoots happening. I never really got into that. But yeah, it's, you know, you basically, everyone wears masks, everyone tries to test beforehand, like that whole protocol is in place. And then the somebody takes off their mask at the last minute and all that kind of thing. But it's definitely getting better. I would also say it depends on the size of the production and how big the client is. You know, it seems like the bigger the company you're shooting for, the more liability, the more red tape, the more testing and masks and all kinds of protocols in place. And the smaller time stuff, it's a little more chill. But I think as time goes on, it'll start to just minimize and hopefully go away at some point.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, we're in the wait and see mode right now. Everybody is globally. You know, yeah. One other question is how to, like, your ingest of clients. You know, are you, obviously if it's a big thing like the hands shoot with all the celebrities in LA, I'm guessing it's a publicist that reached out to you and said, hey, can you do this? Are you available? And you guys negotiate prices and you go out there, you do the gig. But what if it's a relatively, quote, normal person, like some CEO or even just a model or an actor that wants a headshot done, and they absolutely want you to do it? How does that ingest flow and delivery flow work for you?
Well, that's actually a pretty unusual situation. I almost never have individuals reach out to me and to do a shoot like for them where they personally pay for it. You know, that's almost never, yeah. So it's always through like a magazine or a company or an agency or somebody who's doing a campaign or promoting something, or, you know, it's a movie, or it's, let's say, a film festival. Where I'm at the festival and everyone's promoting their movie. And so I'm set up to shoot portraits, you know, in sort of the bigger promotional machine of the festival and the movies. So that's how I've done most of my work. And I wouldn't say, I mean, it on the very rare occasion, I'll get an email from someone saying, hey, listen, I want to do a shoot. And a lot of times I almost dissuade them from it because I'm like, listen, it's going to be expensive. Not because I'm expensive. It's just because we have to get a place. We have to get some lighting. Like, all that stuff costs money. And I'm not set up in, you know, my sort of lean and mean move on the fly business model where I can just have someone show up on any given day and make a fully produced, massive, you know, lit shot happen. You know, it's just not my thing. So, but yeah, it does happen sometimes. Other times I've had people like tack on to the end of a shoot where I'm like in a studio somewhere and I have a friend who needs a headshot or something. I'll just like come to the studio, you know, 5 o'clock, and we'll, you know, surf off of all that stuff that's already paid for. But yeah, I mean, that's not really my business is portrait photographer, is shooting people's like commissioned portraits.
Yeah. What's the deliverable for one of those one of the type of shoots that are in your business model? What's the final deliverable? Is it a URL with a username and password of final selects, or, you know, what do you give the client, you know, to get the check? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on who it's for and what they want to do. A lot of times they'll get a drive with or a link, depending on, you know, where they are and how, you know, just logistically, but they'll get like low-res JPEGs of everything that I shot, and then they'll edit it and then come back with like a high-res order that then goes into retouching, and then we go round, you know, a few rounds of retouching, and then the final one will just get like FTP'd over. Okay. There's certain clients like in the entertainment industry, like the key art type poster type stuff where they want the entire shoot and I'd never see it again. Like it just, they'll take it from the shoot and, you know, do their thing with it and it comes back, you know, done as like that one on that one.
Yeah.
On the, it's like a completely finished, you know, highly retouched composited thing. And I have not much to do with it because it's all part of the, you know, agency client bounce back and forth that's been happening for months. And I'm sort of the piece that plugs in the imagery for them to do their thing.
Love that. You know, I could ask you questions forever, man. I love this stuff. This is so interesting. I wanted to transition and talk about education a little bit. And this, I know you have a course up there on professional lighting for studio photography with a company called Domestika. And I'm going to bring the page up here. Folks that are listening to this audio, head over to the This Week in Photo site or our YouTube channel to check out the video. But I'm on your page now, the Domestika page for your course. And I want to know about this course, first of all, A. And B, I'm noticing down here on the site, it's $10 right now. And it's normally $60, $59.99 for the next 2 days as we record this. So, and again, this is August 23rd as we're recording this. So, you know, use your time wisely. Tell us about this course.
Yeah, so this was an interesting thing that kind of came up during the that pandemic time when there was like no work, and I was kind of had the time to really stop and think about like what other things to do. And you know, it was really, I mean, besides writing like a children's book and building a guitar and doing a whole bunch of non-photo stuff, I had this idea of doing an online course about lighting, and with my kind of approach to it as like I mentioned earlier, whereas like you think about it from the fundamentals, you know, starting with what does this picture want to look like? What kind of light do I want to use? And then building it from there. And I hadn't really seen that approach anywhere. It's a lot of like, this is a softbox and you use this for portraits, that kind of stuff. And I felt like there's a different way of thinking about it. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And I partnered with Domestika, which is a really cool company that does online courses that's based in Spain, and they're a big player, you know, all around the world, and they're in the US I'd say a little bit more recently, so it may not be as well known here as it is other places, but they have incredible reach, and it's pretty amazing how many people have already seen the course and from, you know, all different countries, and it's only been out for, you know, about a month. So yeah, we put this together, and you know, they're really cool. You know, at just the amount of production and know-how they brought to the back end of it. Like I considered trying to do it myself, but I'm so glad that I partnered with them to do the production of it. And yeah, so basically the idea is it's how do you think about lighting in a sort of clinical abstract way, and then bring those fundamentals to building the shot you want. And so we go through a lot of the sort of real basic properties of light in the beginning, and then what modifiers do what to what kind of light, and like a couple of, you know, surveys of all the different tools out there that are at your disposal, and that kind of thing. And then case studies of like my own work, what I used for this shot, why, and then like my influences. And so there's a lot of different sections to it, but I'm really happy with it. I think it came together, you know, very well, and I hope people, you know, get something out of it.
Yeah, this is cool. I'm looking at the page now. I'm playing this video on the page. It's got you doing your thing up there. That's cool. That's really cool. Congratulations on that. It looks like it's a big hit already. Looking at the number of people that have subscribed to the course. So if people want to check out this course, if they want to check out your work, or if somebody's watching or listening to this and they want to contract you to do some big Hollywood, New York, you know, whatever gig, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, just through my website, all the information is there, like scottmcdermott.com. I have, you know, an agent who deals with a lot of the sort of bigger jobs, but I'm always happy to hear from anybody. Yeah, and you know, certainly Instagram and all that's a great place to follow what's happening all the time. Yeah, there's the site, and yeah, it's all there on the contact page, and yeah, certainly
very good.
Get to reach out.
Very good, man. Thank you for doing this. This is a great conversation. Like I said, it's refreshing to hear someone who's more, A team with their photography, or James Bond. Anything is a weapon. It all goes to getting the mission done, versus being a brand zealot. And everything is a nail, because I have this one hammer, So congratulations and kudos on that, and congratulations on this ridiculously amazing body of work that I'm sure you're only just getting started with. So I appreciate you.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really enjoy the podcast too. I've watched it for sure, and it's cool. Keep doing what you do.
I will. Thank you. All right, my friend. You have a good rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
This is TWiP.